Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to the second session of this conference, and it's titled Benchmarking Manufacturing Competitiveness in a Global Perspective. As you all know that I'm going to be chairing this session, but the first talk in this session is by Peter Kudal and Kumar Kandaswamy. Both of them are from Deloitte Research. One's based in India, Kumar's based in India, and Peter is from the US. And in the morning, Ajit spoke about the benchmarking study and the data that they have collected over several, through a large research effort, and Kumar and Peter will be talking about that and giving us their perspective about competing in a global manufacturing setup. The second talk is by J.C. Sehgal, and you're seeing a different name here. Originally, Ajay Piramal was supposed to be here, but he sent an equally eloquent speaker to our conference here, and he's going to give us a perspective on the biotech pharma industry, and he promised to create a controversy with the earlier speaker, so we have an interesting talk here. And the last talk is by Professor Vishwanathan. He comes to us from NUS, but he's been in India before and has a lot of experience and expertise in the supply chain industry in India, and he's going to talk about how do we make India into a globally competitive manufacturing hub, and what all do we need to do. So he's going to give us his perspectives on that. The last talk, which was by Premal Udani, has been canceled, so that's why we have time. This is a very flexible schedule. As you can see, we are neither resource constrained in space here, neither in time. So, so that's a good thing. And we'll take the tea break right after these three talks, and then come back for the panel session. So that should give us enough time to kind of mix and discuss ideas. So without any, and I'd leave the speakers to introduce themselves to you so that they can tell you a little bit more about their experiences and their backgrounds. So Peter, why don't you take this?
Okay. Thank you, Milind. My name is Peter Kudal. As Milind already said, I head up the global manufacturing research for Deloitte Research. I'm here today with Kumar Kandaswamy, who's heads up manufacturing, our manufacturing practice in India. We have been fortunate to be working with the Indian practice now for several years, doing this research that we're going to present a little piece of today. And I just want to thank him and the practice for working with us on this. And also would like to thank ISB, Stern, Sridhar Sadri, and Anthaya from Purdue University for collaborating on this. We are very excited, as Jit Campbell already said, my colleague who heads up Deloitte Research globally. And we're very excited that this has actually taken place. It's taken, I think, at least a year of discussions and planning to get to this stage, but we hope that with this we are able to continue to build on our research base and knowledge base about what makes Indian manufacturing so exciting. I agree with the previous speakers today and yesterday that it is a very exciting time for researchers, at least, I'm sure from practitioners as well, to study Indian industry. When you happen to be based in New York, when you sit there and look at the growth numbers and some of the profit numbers and others come out of India, it is a very exciting time. At the same time, we realize that China keeps getting a lot of the attention in the media, although it's starting to change. You probably also, many of you may have seen one of the latest issues of Business Week, focusing again on China versus India, and I think putting a very good light on Indian industry, not just the IT and services industries, but also manufacturing and related industries. With that, I'm going to provide an overview of some of the global research that we've done. Over the last more than 2 years, we've been out interviewing and surveying more than 800 companies and business units globally. We started primarily in North America and Europe, both Western and Central and Eastern Europe, and now we're making a significant inroads and rolling this out in Asia Pacific. in total, the sales from these companies is more than $1 trillion. So we do feel that when we talk about trends and challenges of manufacturing, it's not just based on myths and small samples. It is based on fact from these companies. I should say that the companies that participate in this research, we actually go back to them and offer to provide them with an assessment of their capabilities across their operations and strategies and operations against the peer groups worldwide. We can do that because we have the scale in the survey. In terms of the depth of the survey work we're doing, I think we have almost more than 400 line item questions that these companies answer to participate in this. So what we're showing now is a very, very simple look at the findings, and we have a lot more. We published a number of studies and articles in different journals and magazines that you're all welcome to. We certainly can share with you. You can send me an email or go to our website for some of that as well. Just the profile of the companies participating: North America 34%, Western Europe 44%, Central and Eastern Europe 10%, Asia Pacific 10%. As I said, we want to grow that past. Other 2%, primarily South Africa has been very aggressive in getting involved in this effort. Industry profile, I won't go through that, but you see it represents fairly well the different global industries out there. It also allows us to look at these individual industries in detail. The size profile, maybe in an Indian context, maybe it's biased a little bit on the high side, but I think it is a fair assessment. 13% of the companies are less than 50 million. About 29% is between 50 and 200 million, and so forth, and a lot of very large companies. So we're also able to look at the data, small and medium size versus the rest. And again, we can use that to look at specific companies in India and elsewhere based on this. Sorry. So what are the critical trends? And to keep the talk short and the discussion simple, we find three major things going on, at least from a global perspective. If you look at the global value chain complexity, you have an axis here, and as you can imagine, I'll get to the value chain capabilities later. How do you get money out of this? But cost reduction and outsourcing, clearly one of the main drivers of complexity. It's something that's been going on for a while now in at least in many countries, and it's continuing. If you look at outsourcing, I'll show you some numbers on outsourcing a little later. New markets, the pursuit of new markets, a major driver of growth for these companies, but it's also a major driver of complexity. When your supply chains have to stretch into new markets, you very easily become clobbered with a lot of problems you don't want. Innovation, it's certainly not over. The drive to produce more and more new products with shorter and shorter time to market is making managing this whole thing and getting value out of it very, very difficult. Just a little bit on the various drivers. Outsourcing and offshoring are creating dramatic changes in global value chains. If we look at cost reduction, reduction in workforce, close production facilities, move production, anywhere from 50 to 90% of companies said that they have done that over the last 3 years, which is reduction in workforce. To say you've done something significant in this area, it's dramatic impact, of course, on these organizations. Close production, 50% have close production, 50% have moved production elsewhere. These are difficult to deal with. In terms of outsourcing, if you look at three major functions: manufacturing functions, distribution logistics function, engineering, anywhere from a little less than 60 to more than 60% of companies said they've done something major in this area. But you say, okay, how much more can you outsource? If you keep outsourcing, you might as well just have sold your company. But when we look in more detail of these outsourcing numbers, we see that if you look at the chart to the left here, the companies that have major implementation of outsourcing in terms of engineering, manufacturing, distribution, logistics, those are actually very small. In fact, up to nearly 50% of companies have done no such thing. They have not outsourced engineering. They have not outsourced manufacturing or distribution logistics. You say whether is it right or wrong to outsource, and should they keep it? It depends. That's what researchers like to say. But it's still a lot of opportunity for companies to change, and I think what we're seeing is that they plan to do that in the years ahead. But when you look at outsourcing concerns, we did a separate piece of research. So we looked about 600 COOs in companies, and we look particularly at the outsourcing issue and what were the biggest concerns with that. And on top of the list, they could only check one of these things. So, and the top of the list, the loss of competitive advantage, wrong processes, hollowing out. If you put those answers together, was one of the biggest concerns. You could see that that's a very, very strategic issue for these companies, and the concerns about outsourcing are very high. If you look at cost, I mean, what's the reason for doing outsourcing? At least the one companies typically announce is certainly cost and trying to keep costs down, or maybe become more flexible as well. But cost is a really it's a big concern in having done outsourcing. So there are many more issues here. Wrong vendor management. Very few companies actually have good capabilities for managing outsourced relationships. Overall, managing supplier relationships is a big problem for companies. And the list goes on. Another major driver of complexity is new product development. So we've been looking at these companies and looking at what they've done in the past, what they say they've done, and what they plan to do in the future. If you look at new product revenue, about 3 years ago or so, new product revenue was on average about 21% of sales. New product revenue meaning products introduced from 0 to 3 years before that time. Today, around 2004, 2005, that percentage is 29%. And in fact, we asked them, so what do you expect it to be in 3 years? It's 35%. So very dramatic change for organizations. If you're used to 20% and suddenly you have to deal with 35%, increase of, 66% or so, 75% perhaps. To manage that in your supply chain, where supply chain managers may have been used to 5 product introductions per year, suddenly they have to manage, would that be about 8 or 9? That can really make it very difficult. If you at the same time are growing fast, you're outsourcing more, keeping all together is a big problem. In fact, when we looked at top drivers for growth of these companies, and over the next 3 years, they expect new product service launch to be the #1 driver for growth. Later, Kumar will look at the Indian companies, what they're doing, a little bit different, but that's clearly a key driver for growth. We looked at R&D expenditures. Currently, it's about 4%. Again, we have numbers for the Indian companies, but in 3 years, it's only going to be 4.3%. So major increase in new products, yet there's not a lot more R&D. I'm sure that Arun, you can talk to your industry. It's very difficult to justify big investments in R&D in just about any industry. So no more money, a faster time to market. We also looked at time to market about 3 years ago. On average, it was 18 months, and today about 15 months, and in about 3 years they expect it to be 12 months. Again, this varies, of course, a lot across the different industries, from auto to high tech to biotech. But the trend is certainly a much shorter time to market. As we also know, most products fail, so to get value out of this is very, very difficult. We've done a separate study on innovation based on this, and we can share that with you. So in terms of geographic expansion, entering new markets, sourcing from new places, manufacturing in new places, and engineering in new places. If you look at the U.S. multinationals, we have about 226 U.S.-based companies and business units in the database. Across the board, China is the top destination. Marketing and sales, 56% of companies plan to enter or expand in China over the next 3 years. For sourcing, 57%. For manufacturing, 38%. And for engineering R&D, about 26%. Just a massive, I mean, at least a lot of very, very interesting intentions. We have done some research on foreign direct investment by U.S. multinationals. Of course, that tends to be more historical based on government data. And those investments into China have not been that impressive despite the hype. But we wonder if it's we're just standing at a threshold where those investments really are going to pick up. The same perhaps could be said for India. We did look at, we just published a study a few months ago on U.S. multinationals in manufacturing their investments into India, which, at least by government records, were on net basis only $50 million in 2003. Clearly, a number that's way below what you would expect, given all the hype about the opportunities. But we are seeing when we ask the company, so where do you plan to invest, that India shows up. In terms of marketing and sales, 23% of U.S. multinationals plan to go into India. In sourcing, it's 21%.